My name is Landon Baumgard with Piano Adventures, and I'm just really excited to be here with you all. We have a great presentation today with Randall Faber, my colleague Theresa Cheng, on the topic of piano technique, the secrets. What are they? How do we build a proper technique from an early stage of piano playing? We're going to break this down into a few sections, of course, saving some room at the end for some Q&A because that's always a really productive thing to do. But first of all, Randall Faber is going to join us and talk about this essential question of what is technique and artistry. You might know those terms from some of the core books in the Piano Adventure series, but just as general concepts and how they relate to building piano technique, we're going to talk about that. Then we're going to take a look at some of the specific technique secrets that exist within the Piano Adventures methodology at two different levels, first in the primer level, as well as in level 2A. And at that point, we're going to have Theresa come on and chat with you a little bit about our performance exams, which if you don't know about them, you should. They're a really exciting, new, fresh type of exam being offered for students as early as the primer level. And then we'll go right into our Q&A as well following that. So at this point, I'd really love to just invite Randall Faber on to get us started talking about what is technique and artistry.
Thank you, Landon. Great to be here, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. Technique and artistry, these two terms, they're lofty terms. That if we look at technique, what comes to mind? We imagine the bravura octaves, right? Fast scales, the Chopin etudes, big repertoire. And when we think of artistry, we tend to think of the Chopin nocturne or Fauré or Ravel, the subtle shape of phrases, the voicing of chords, and so on. And in so doing, we tend to make this thought that we can wait until we get to big repertoire to really teach technique or exquisite artistry. In other words, there's a temptation to say, well, I'll get to advanced technique when I'm teaching the Chopin etudes. Or when I'm teaching a Chopin nocturne, that's when I can really get into the expression. And that's not a very good thinking when you're dealing with the child and the child's development. Because what happens then is we think we have a different strata of technique, that we can get away with something at the early levels, and then we'll fix it later. But if we look at the element of development and developing technique and artistry, it becomes very clear that we want to deal with touch and sound, technique and artistry, right from the very start to get that right track of development. And that becomes even more clear when we look at what technique really is and what artistry really is. You know, technique of to be able to control the sound or play loud and fast is one aspect of technique, but also to be able to really control the voicing and the sound, controlling right in the finger, the sensations of touch and the color. That intimacy takes technical control, doesn't it? So it's a spurious route to go to say there's technique here and there's expression here. In other words, we should look that technique is in service to the artistry. I love the words touch and sound as synonymous with technique and artistry. And when we think of that, then there's the element of touch, that I'm feeling the key. I actually have this, I like to think of it as brain space in the finger. In other words, we've allocated brain space to that sensation in the finger. And this then gives us that intimate ability to control the sound. And by controlling the sound, we control the artistry. So we have touch and sound that is intimately related. One of my teachers studied with the great early 20th century pianist Joseph Hoffman at Curtis. You probably heard of that name. And Joseph Hoffman had a little phrase he used, which I found really intriguing. He said, eyes and ears in the fingers. Isn't that interesting? Eyes and ears in the fingers. And when we're talking about touch and sound and that intimate connection between touch and sound, I think the idea of having eyes and ears in the fingers is wonderful because it tells us that that sound, the act of listening, has to be connected with our touch. I always wanted to take a little marker and draw two little eyes on the fingertip of a student, then little ears on the side, and you wonder how that would really, bring them into the keyboard in a special way. And I think it's a wonderful image to help us remember then that we have to teach that listening, and we have to teach the sensation of touch. I'd like to recommend that when we examine technique, we listen for artistry, right? And this behooves not only for the student to be doing that listening, but we as teachers, we tie those together. We examine technique and we listen for artistry. There's a certain element here of building foundational skills. And we know from the neuroscience, there's a phrase that neuroscientists like to use, and that's what fires together, wires together. Let's think a little bit about the neurology here. We had talked about this pad of the finger and that sensitivity, right? Well, if we use that phrase, what fires together, wires together, then if I'm touching that key and I feel that touch, I get that feedback through the sensory nerves and along with the motor nerves of firing the finger, but then I'm also tying that into the sound. So now all of these elements wire together. So imagine that's a real positive development, isn't it? Because we're wiring in our ears then with our touch. But you can imagine what happens. What if we had tension in the hand, and every time we played finger 3, that finger 5 would stick in the air, or we get a grasping of the thumb. So then those are firing together, which means they wire together. So with repetition, that neural circuit grabs not only the action of playing the key, but it also brings in the tension in the alternate fingers or in the thumb or in the hand. So we're actually wiring in bad habits. And this is bad enough at the start, but when we practice and run through hundreds to thousands of hours, it's making that habit automatic. It's routinizing and making that wiring robust, but not of a good playing or a good habit, but it actually makes the bad habits robust and solid. So it's really important then that we get technique right from the start. So the two really important lessons, I think, on technique and artistry is that we do address technique and artistry right from the start. The expression and the sound intimately tied in with the fingers and hands and wrist. And secondly, that the technique and artistry, touch and sound, they are intimately tied together, and we wire them together as we develop our skills of piano technique and piano expression. In other words, the whole pianistic package is the intimate connection of touch and sound. Let's take a look at that early level then, because we've been talking about fundamentals. So the fundamentals, we want to go early. We want to establish this sort of neural development at the earliest levels, right? So that it can be well practiced and well rehearsed and built later. There's a little phrase I'd like to share with you that I found very compelling in terms of many, many areas, but particularly in development, skill development. And that's the amplified trajectory of initial conditions. Now, I know that's a mouthful, so bear with me. I use the word ATTIC, A-T-T-I-C, as kind of an acronym for this. Only one T, but it helps out. An amplified trajectory of initial conditions. And what this is meaning is that the initial conditions get exaggerated or leveraged as time goes on. Imagine two nearly parallel lines, right? They start out the same, but there's a little divergence. Well, there's only very little difference in the start. But if we project out 100 feet, those lines have diverged a great deal. And so whether that's a distance or whether it's in time, little changes, little differences in time or changes at the start are amplified with time. And so we see this in, of course, in investments, right? If you put a bigger investment in early, 30 years later, that's a huge difference. And we can see that also then in the talent development. in that if we develop that better ear early on, the ear gets better and better. If we get the rhythmic sense in the body at a young age, it leverages and it becomes very rhythmic later. It's really the secret, I think, to talent development and the secret to a lot of aspects of life and progress. So the amplified trajectory of initial conditions. So I'm bringing up here the primer level technique book because this is the initial conditions, right? This is the early start of the student. So what we can do to get them on the right track for touch and sound here is going to be highly leveraged, highly valuable as the student progresses on up, both in higher repertoire and through the later years. Let's take a look at our technique secrets then as fundamental foundations. We got a list of them here on our screen. We have the good posture, very, very important, establishing the distance at the keyboard as well as the structure of the body, rounded hand shape, and then the firm fingertip, and then the heavy wet ropes, we call it, that arm weight, heavy arms, and then a correct thumb position. All are very important, and it's foundational, of course, to sit the right distance from the keyboard. Otherwise, all of the other elements of rounded hand shape, firm finger, all fall apart, really. So that's foundational. And that arm weight is so important because that allows us to use the efficiency of gravity in our playing. So we want to bring that in. And of course, students at a young age won't have a really great sense of a drop of arm weight, but we invite them into it so they're not practicing for dozens and dozens of hours of suspending their arms in the air. We get them right away to be able to drop into the keys. Let's zero in on just a couple of these here today. And the ones I'm zeroing in on, rounded hand shape and firm fingertip. And I'm picking those specifically here at the primer level because these have to do with structure. As we look through some of these elements today, both at primer level and level 2A, we can look at the dichotomy of structure in technique and relaxation in technique. In a way, it kind of comes down to the old Germanic school of a lot of finger work and having that rounded hand shape for finger versus more of that British Tobias Maté relaxation. And sometimes we can get into the kind of dialogue of do we want structure or do we want relaxation? And it's not really in one or the other. It's having the structure in the right places at the right time and relaxation in the right places at the right time. So we'll pick that up as a theme as we go on. But here, let's look at rounded hand shape and firm fingertip, because the rounded hand shape is going to build this bridge right here. And this bridge is part of our structure because it'll hold and support our finger motion as opposed to collapsing. So how do we get a good rounded hand shape? How do we support and develop this bridge? Well, instead of saying, I'm going to always curve the fingers, telling a student to curve the fingers, that's a problem because when you tell the student to have that curved finger, often what they do is they get into a grip mode, and then you have tension in the hand. So what we're doing here is a way of trying to establish that tall bridge without any tension, and yet that structure is there. So here's the exercise. What we do is rest a loose fist here on the keys, and then we just simply open up the hand then into that rounded hand shape. Here it is again. So the fingers are opening like the petals of a flower. We call this the blooming flowers is the exercise. So we do it here with the left hand. And you notice those knuckles stay tall. It's a much more effective way than having the student lay their fingers on the keys and then we say curve the fingers. Well, it doesn't really do it because you don't have an arch here. So it's a great way of building that arch. And when we're dealing with young kids, recognize that they don't necessarily have the structural support in their hand. They don't have a piano hand yet because it hasn't been developed. But that doesn't mean we can't be the ones to develop it. In other words, just work on developing that piano hand. It's our responsibility. We take them through the steps and we develop the right structures and the right relaxations. Moving to the other secret we wanted to focus in on today is the firm fingertips. And that fingertip, we've all noticed that even sometimes in our own playing at different stages of development or with the child, that end of that finger can collapse like this. And if it collapses, of course, then it's not going to carry the arm weight with the same sensitivity or the same activation as the one where it is firm. So we need each one to be able to strike with an appropriate firmness. But notice again, I'm not overly curling and I'm not doing a whole lot of wide finger motions here. I'm just suggesting that that tip is solid enough to carry the weight of the hand, weight of the arm. So exercise for it. Let's do making O. So we take fingers 1 and 2 together and just relax the thumb. Don't let the thumb push hard, but just take them together and give a light squeeze, relax, squeeze, relax. Next, 3 and 1. Relax, squeeze, 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 4 and 1. And this is a great exercise for the youngster because it helps them find that fingertip and it helps support it. It also goes around really well with the primer lesson activity of supporting that fingertip with the thumb. So when we do pecking rooster, pecking head, or some of these other areas we're going to drop in on a finger 3, that supported 3 relates again to our making O's. It's a very valuable exercise. And one little observation that's important, this isn't just only for the very young. You could use this in a more advanced fashion. If we're playing advanced work and passages, the question sometimes is, how do we align that arm weight we talked about with the finger being played? In other words, if I take, let's take an arpeggio. Let's take an F major arpeggio. If I stop at a certain note, if I say I had my hand here and I stopped here, notice my hand is kind of wide like this, isn't it? And that doesn't allow the arm weight to flow through this C. So what I do instead is when I stop at the C, make an O right on the keyboard, then relax again. You see what I did is I just brought my thumb to the key, and now I've demonstrated an ideal position here where my arm is aligned over that knuckle and over the finger. So even in the middle of passage where, stop and check, oh yes, okay, I'm in a good position there. Oops, that's not good, this is good. You see the difference? In other words, make an O right at that very point where you want to check your positioning, and that O will bring your hand and arm in alignment to transfer the weight. So all of these have very good applications at higher levels, not just at the beginning. Notice also what we're doing here is we're really shaping and developing that sense of technique and that combination of the feel. We talked about the motion and the sound, but it's also the feel of the key. We want that to be wired up into that somatosensory cortex. It's right behind the motor cortex. We got the motor cortex like a headband that's controlling our fingers and our arms and so on. But then the sensory cortex that's just on the other side of the little cavern there. So it's like a secondary headband that comes around. And if we can wire that sensation along with the motor so they relate to each other, then we're feeling our way of our gestures of motion and sensitivity on the keyboard, and that ties into the musical sound, ties literally to touch and sound and motion all together. So that's the essence of our wiring. Let's shift now to an example of how do we make this artistic. Obviously, what we talked about now is very technical in nature, but what we have is artistry pieces throughout the book to be able to take the concepts like our firm fingertip, our rounded hand shape, and our arm weight, right? I'm on page 29 here's Peaceful Sunset, which is the Artistry Magic piece a little bit later in the book at a unit 9. So I'm dropping in with arm weight and then no arm weight. Very soft. And then less and less arm weight. You notice there's some relaxation there as we're moving with our rainbows around the keys, and there's the relaxation of dropping in with the arm weight. Also notice how we're developing here balance between the hands. We're not overtly playing a loud right hand against a soft left hand, but delaying them in time. Loud followed by soft helps us eventually be able to play loud and soft right at the same time. So these are prerequisite skills, you might say, for developing balance or contrasting articulations between the hands. Okay, let's go. We'll move out of our actual looking at those secrets specifically, but we'd like now to take a look from a little different lens. And let's look at some of our students working with these pieces. You know, there's with our exams, we have a way of seeing broadly other students and all. So we want to share that with you as an opportunity for you not to just reflect on your own technique and not reflecting on a student's technique, but can we observe hundreds of other students of what they're doing in technique, and then what do we learn about that developmental process? Landon, all yours.
Sure. Well, thank you, Randy. So far, so very insightful. I know everybody's getting a lot out of this. I want to introduce you to Amanda, who you see on the screen here. This is a student who submitted a performance exam through the Piano Adventures exams, which you'll hear a bit more about later, of Rain, Rain, Go Away. This is, again, from the primer level. And what I want you to do as we listen to her performance and watch her performance is actually gauge, for you as a teacher, what is she doing great? And if you would, go back and think about those technique secrets that are elemental, fundamental to the primer level, right? Good posture, firm fingertips, rounded hand shape, arm weight, correct thumb position. So if we can go ahead and press play on this video, and hopefully the sound will come through okay for everybody. So having watched that, go ahead, if you would, pop into the chat. What is Amanda doing really well in terms of those technique secrets? Because I know as a piano teacher, and maybe this is true for you, one thing that pops out to me immediately, which is so refreshing, is she's actually sitting the right distance from the keyboard. She's actually sitting at the appropriate height. Two extraordinarily fundamental things that go into that piano technique from the very earliest. But yeah, we've got people complimenting that rounded hand shape, which was very elegant and very well supported. Clearly, those rainbows, right? The wrist float offs. I mean, have you seen a more beautiful release of a note? Randy, did you have anything that stood out to you in that performance that you want to call out?
Well, I definitely do, and you've kind of nailed it there. I think when we talked about structure and relaxation as a way of a lens of looking at this, we saw that she had great structure posturally, she had great structure within her hand, and at the same time, she had that wonderfully relaxed wrist. If there's the two things we see most problematic is that student sitting too close, and that brings the wrist down, and that flops the finger. So no problem with that because you had that posture right. The second biggest issue that we would see across thousands of students around the world is that students tend to lock their wrist. And so if we can unlock that wrist early on, that's fabulous. And the wrist float off really does that. Notice it's not a downward motion of the wrist. Students tend to go down when we don't want them to, but it's that upward motion of the wrist, and she handles that so well. And the beauty of it too is that in her performance, we could see how she's proud of that wrist motion, and that's part of her expressive gesture, which leads to the expressive playing.
Absolutely. Well, Theresa, why don't you give us an idea of how Amanda did on her performance exam?
Sounds good. Thank you. My name is Theresa. I'm part of the exam team at Piano Adventures, and I'm going to give you an overview of the Piano Adventures evaluation sheet. Amanda was an actual student who participated in the fall 2024 session of the Piano Adventures performance exam. And this is an example of a blank evaluation sheet. So you can see the performance exam grades students in 5 areas: notes, rhythm, dynamics and expression, posture and poise, and technique. And in each of these 5 categories, they can get one of 3 ratings: excellent, which gives them 5 points, very good, which gives them 4 points, or developing, which gives them 3 points. And you can see from our sample exam student, Amanda, she played beautifully and demonstrated really superb technique. So you can imagine that her ratings would probably be excellent all across the board. And then there's an area for a coach's comment. Each of our exams is graded by Piano Adventures coach. In this exam, Amanda's exam was graded by Coach Coda. All of our exam coaches have fun music pseudonyms, such as Coach Coda shown here. There's names like Coach Glissando, Coach Cadenza. It adds a little playful element to the exam because the exams do start all the way at the primer level. So there could be students as young as 5 years old taking the exam. And while it seems fun, these are actual trained evaluators. They have been trained to grade in the piano style, in a warm and encouraging style. In the coach's comments, the exam coach is an acronym called WARM, W-A-R-M, WARM. And that is a framework that all of our coaches use when they write the comments. WARM stands for W, welcoming, A, affirm, R, recommend, and M, a moving forward comment. So in this case, the coach would probably comment on her posture, her excellent sitting position, and they may use a metaphor. What I've often seen our coaches use is fun metaphors for the students. So something like, I can imagine all of your raindrops falling with each quarter note in Rain, Rain, Go Away. And then they'll comment on the different elements that they're rated on, like the dynamics. The graceful wrist lifts was definitely one as her right hand moved higher. And then maybe a comment about at the end with her hands gently lifting off the keys and into her lap. And a moving forward comment would be at the end saying that she is more than ready to move on to level 1. We look forward to seeing her there. And then on the bottom right, you can see that the student's video was nominated for the Bravo Board. The Bravo Board is actually a public area of our website where students can get their videos featured on there and share it with their family and friends. In this case, Coach Coda recommended Amanda on this video, Rain, Rain, Go Away, and they gave a special shout out, which is just a particularly noteworthy thing about the piece, and gave a shout out about Amanda's firm fingertips and relaxed wrists. And then if the child's parent gives permission by toggling this button called Add to the Bravo Board, the video gets posted onto our website. If you go to our website, exams.pianoadventures.com, you can actually see Bravo Board videos from students all around the world. It's really an exciting area of our website, and it gives you a snapshot into what is going on out there in the world. Sometimes from a Piano Adventures perspective, we're so much on the content side and the publication side. And now to be able to see a snapshot and a glimpse into students all around the world and how they perform has really been such a treasure. And so I hope you will take a look at the Bravo Board. So this is just an overview of the coach comment sheet. Hopefully it gives you some context as to what students are graded on and what this video was for. Now we're gonna head back to Randy, and he's gonna dive into some level 2A technique secrets.
Very good. Thank you, Theresa. Let's take an overview look at what do we have at the level 2A, and we can see how this is going to be a sequence, you might say, a stepping through or a scaffolding, moving up, recapping some of the elements that we had at primer, but introducing some new concepts as well. Next slide, please. Here we go. We've got a review of firm fingertips with a different exercise for it. And then the light thumb, I'm going to cover that in detail with you in a moment. The fast fingers and hands together coordination. Here's something I really urge you to dig into these. At this point in the student's progress, they've gone through primer 1, now we're in 2A. We're going to start really developing finger coordination. So we give them the secrets to playing fast, which is, of course, to practice slowly. But there's a special way to practice slowly. It's that sense of impact and immediate relaxation without losing the structure. We won't have time to get into that in detail today, but at another session, and we urge you to view the videos on the Teacher Atlas and Technique and Artistry site to be able to do the deep dive into it. Similarly, hands together coordination. Hands together coordination is interesting because it's both coordinating the hands to work together and also how to work independently. And so there's a push-pull in there that we want to do special attention to. And then the wrist float off, I'm going to cover with you today as well. And that's a real point of relaxation. So let's give a little circling around light thumb and wrist float off. And I chose these because these are relaxation secrets, whereas at the primer level, we focused on 2 structural secrets. Light thumb. I'm going to grab my book here and we'll open the Technique in Artistry to Light as a Feather, which is our name of our exercise, teaching the light thumb. And why a light thumb? This may be a little foreign to most, and it has to do with how we handle the thumb. If you give a close-up here on my hand, if you don't mind, we have the thumb as a separate appendage. It doesn't hinge at the bridge, does it? It's hinging. Some people think it hinges over here. That's our intuition. But it's actually hinging way up here at the wrist. In other words, you see how much I can go up and down here, hinging from this point right here. And so to be able to do a wide, independent swing of the thumb is really, really helpful in piano technique because it allows us to do big arpeggios and big jumps. But it also allows the control of sounds such as this, little accompaniment patterns, where in the hands of a student, we often hear this gripping, but the light thumb allows the student to play that with more of a dance quality. So here's the exercise. We're going to close the keyboard, and we're going to do this. Thumb is playing lightly. Thumb is playing lightly. In other words, I'm resting my structure here, but the thumb is independent. And it's very, very important to find that independent swing of the thumb. It's going to have big payoff down the line. So let's not wait until collegiate study on it. Let's get it in with the early levels because it'll have big payoff in the expressive playing. Okay, secret 5. Let's go to our slide for secret 5. This is the wrist float off. It's actually a recap of the wrist float off that we did on the closed keyboard lid at level 1, right? So it's not a first time on here, but here we're saying that upward motion of the wrist, we're going to do it by dropping in with arm weight and taking that rainbow or that moonwalk across the keys. So the wrist is floating off to make the arc. And this is really critically important because piano playing isn't this. It's not a drop, lift up, move, and go sideways. In other words, the rectangles are not really in the pianistic repertoire of motions, but arcs are. We want to arc. Even smaller leaps are just smaller arcs, right? And then we go bigger arcs for bigger leaps. So we train the student in the arcs and we train with that relaxed wrist. One other note on it is if we have a chord and we're jumping up to another chord, notice how my wrist can lead. And that gives a chance to take big stretch, but now the hand closes in the meantime and it comes back down. So the float off gives a chance for the fingers to relax and then to come back in. So there's no ongoing tension. You wouldn't want to lift up and hold that chord in its formation as you move. You want the hand to reclose and relax and then come back down. So that would be more of an expansive, advanced application of the same concept. Okay, we'll move next to Artistry Magic piece. And here we have Malawinia. And let's give a listen to this one. This is a chance, of course, to bring together the application of the technique gestures for real expressive sounds. So we'll watch for, maybe as I play here, let's do a close-up on my playing and watch for structure and watch for relaxation. we see with that hand crossing at the end, we get our float off. And at the beginning, you see the structure here, but yet with a sense of bounce and relaxation. Here, structure, arm weight, and definitely that bridge, very supported, and then the light thumb allows the accompaniment, and so forth. And again, structure here. Okay, let's take a look now at some students playing at this level and see if we can spot some elements of technique there. To you, Landon.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And before we actually get to our next student, Adeline, I just wanted to share with the audience, in case you're wondering, where can I see more demonstrations of all these technique secrets? We do have a video database of them. It's called Technique and Artistry Online. This is a website that is affiliated and easy to navigate if you have a Piano Adventures Teacher Atlas membership. You'll notice when you log in on your dashboard, it's just right up there on the right hand. You click a link and it takes you there. Otherwise, the website is faberpiano.com. You can go there and sign up even independently for that site if you wish. I don't have a whole lot of time to walk you through what that site is, but I am going to post a quick link in the chat. This is a YouTube video that is a walkthrough of the Piano Adventures Technique and Artistry Online. So if you're curious where you can find and see more videos of these demonstrations, definitely check out that YouTube video. So yeah, at this point, let's move on to our 2A student example. This is Adeline with a beautiful performance example of First Snowflake of Winter. And I want you to think of the same kind of model here, right? So those of you in attendance, take a look at her performance. Think first in your head, you know, like a Piano Adventures coach might do if they were grading an exam, what is this student clearly doing very well? And always, you know, what they're doing well is a great credit to the teacher, because we're all familiar enough with how challenging it can be to build in these really high level technique principles right from this early age. So if we could press play on this video and we'll take a listen to First Snowflake of Winter. Isn't that just a beautiful performance? So yes, Adeline is another student who did really nicely on her exam performance video. First of all, I just want to also note the way that they shot the video. It's a really handy way for anybody who's scoring a sort of exam to see that piano technique playing out. We see the posture, we can see the wrist moving as it moves with a particular student. We also get a nice sense of that arc that the student is carrying in their hand and connecting that through the alignment to their wrist and forearm, etc. But yeah, we wanted to share this video with you because it is an uncommonly expressive and very beautiful video that includes a great kind of dynamic level of playing, from very soft to louder, getting soft again towards the end. You know, that really lovely kind of a accelerando that you get in the sort of improvisatory area towards the end of the piece as well. And yes, many of you are commenting about those beautiful dynamics, the contrast that's present there. Thinking about some of those technique secrets at this level, right? We can check those boxes. Yes, the firm fingertips are there. She's definitely utilizing the light thumb. The fast fingers come into play when she gets into that accelerando sort of feature towards the end of the piece. The hands together coordination is a little bit less of a challenge of this particular piece. But again, number 5, those wrist float offs. Man, how expressive were those, and just visually adding to the performance as well. Randy, did you have anything that came to your mind in watching the performance?
Well, what I loved is listening to it and listening to her listen, right? That was, we even on the recording, even we're hearing those harmonics, we're hearing the vibrations of the sympathetic strings. And I know she's very aware of that. She's just listening to that sound. And the fact that a young person can respond and resonate with that sound that resonates, if you don't mind the double metaphor, but that's getting, she's appreciating that, right? She's really focusing on it, she's hearing it. And that's something that we want so much, because so many times students are just trying to get the notes right, and they're concerned with mechanics rather than that sound.
Well, that's exactly what you, the concept that you brought up in the beginning of your presentation today, yeah. Randy, that idea of listening, the sound, actually taking it in. It's difficult to teach that, right? I mean, it's really easy with a student, even an advanced student, that they play through a whole sonata and it's almost like they didn't even listen to themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
That in a piece where they actually have the space to listen because of the tempo and the kind of technical grading of the piece. It's, again, a very refreshing thing. Theresa, would you like to share a little bit about this student's performance exam?
Yeah, thanks. Here is Adeline's performance exam comment sheet. She was graded by Coach Octave. And so I'm going to repeat the WARM framework because I know some of you had questions and we went kind of fast on that. The WARM, W-A-R-M, and I'll give you an example of what the coach may have said in this one. W, welcoming, A, affirm, R, a recommendation, and M, a moving forward comment. So with W, a welcoming comment, it might have started off with welcoming Adeline and complimenting her on the beautiful snowfall she was able to convey on the piano. And then A, an affirmation of her performance, where she had those really outstanding wrist lift technique coming down the keys in thirds. And then a very nice expressive control of the sound, very natural pedaling technique. R, a point of recommendation. I think no matter what, a student can always have an area that they can improve on. And maybe the coach would recommend something in the middle of the piece with keeping the quarter notes more in tempo to show the difference between the half and the quarter notes. I know we didn't show the sheet music on here, but there's actually a point in the middle where it does accelerate naturally into quarter notes. So maybe more of that. And then M, a moving forward comment, such as, we can't wait to see you in level 2B for more scales, chords, pedaling, and even more expressive artistry at the keys. You can see on the right, this was graded by Coach Octave and that she was nominated for the Bravo board for this piece. And her shout out was graceful wrist float offs. And I think indeed, this was an outstanding display of wrist float offs. And I just want to say in the background, I don't know if you noticed, but she actually had a Piano Adventures Technique Secrets poster displayed. And that was not a plug by us. That was actually something that in the video that we saw, which is a 2 feet by 3 feet poster of all of the technique secrets listed for all of the levels. So it's no wonder why she had really outstanding technique. And then I just wanted to highlight an example of what the Bravo board looks like. On our website, exams.pianoadventures.com, you'll find this, which is the Bravo board, filled with students from everywhere around the world. These videos have their first name and last initial, along with the video that was specifically nominated by their coach and a special shout out. So in this case, you can see Adeline, her special shout out was graceful wrist float offs for Snowflake of Winter. And you can view these on your own on our website. I'm just going to zoom in on Adeline's video here so you could just see how that looks like. You can play any of these videos here, and all of these students have received parent permission to have them on there, and we do make sure that we do have the parent permission before it's there, and that is toggled on through the exam platform. So here would be an example for the video. I'm just going to briefly go into a little bit about the performance exams. I know a lot of you have had questions in our Q&A about the performance exams and how to enroll in that. Just a little closer look. And how I would recommend the performance exams work is as a student starts approaching the middle of their book, then they can start enrolling and practicing for the Piano Adventures performance exam so that by the time they reach the end of their level, they can submit their videos. There's 3 pieces that they need to choose and 3 videos that are submitted online. They're based on a repertoire list that includes over 100 pieces per level. All of our repertoire lists and syllabus are available for free on our website. The repertoire list includes a list 1 piece, which is a lively, faster piece, a list 2 slower piece, and then a list 3 student choice piece, which is any of the pieces from our supplemental library as well as the pre-time to big time library. And the list 3 pieces are the ones that can be played with the teacher duet. So when you look on our Bravo board, you will see some students that actually have their teacher featured with them. Those are all list 3 pieces. After submission, the pieces are evaluated and they'll get their comments back within 28 days. The model performance videos are an excellent area of our website. I would really encourage you to check it out because it is completely free. And there are now over 1,000 free videos on our exam website that demonstrates every single piece in the exam library. They're performed by our very own Landon, who's presenting today. They just show excellent examples of how to perform the piece. So students and teachers can get a better idea of how the piece should sound. Things like what is the correct tempo, proper technique examples, expressiveness. Students who are just learning a piece, they can listen to it to see how their piece sounds up to speed. And then teachers can also assign this as part of their take-home assignment. So I would like for you to check it out. By the time we are done with all of the exam levels, we will have over 2,000 free videos on our exam website. Once your student's ready to perform for the performance exam, they will record 3 separate videos, and they can just be done on your phone or tablet or device equipment. They can be done at the student's home or they can be done in a teacher's studio. As long as it's 1 piece from every list, the teachers do play a part in the exam process. The teachers are asked to review and approve the videos through the exam platform. And then once it's approved, it goes on to the exam coach for grading. For awards, here's an example of a student who received a diploma for participating in both the theory and performance exams. They can also receive award badges for each level. So depending on the student's score, they can earn 1 of 3 badges. Here, it's the All-Star Adventure Award that is shown. There's also the Amazing Adventure Award and the Achieving Adventure Award. If they take both the theory and performance exams, they'll get a diploma, which is signed by Nancy and Randall Faber, as well as their coach. And then if they take 1 exam, then they'll get a certificate of completion. And just to note, we have exams available now for primer through level 2B. So that's primer level, level 1, level 2A, and 2B. The level 3A exams will be released very soon in like 1 to 2 weeks. And then the other higher levels will follow. By the end of this year, 2025, we'll have all levels of the Piano Ventures exams available. And this has really been a big milestone for our company, just being able to offer this to students. If you haven't heard about our theory exams, we haven't really focused on that, but our theory exams are also available. You can see when you go to our website, you could take a look at some sample theory questions. They involve a very fun mascot trophy who is animated through the exam. All of the art comes together in the Piano Ventures exam. It's an interactive exam. And I think once you take a look at it, you'll be able to see a really full picture of what makes Piano Ventures exams so unique and so different. It is something that students as young as 5 can participate in, be successful at, be encouraged. And also a key thing that I really like is that you don't need to purchase anything separate when doing the exams. You can use the books that you've already used for your lessons. Even the teachers do not need to purchase any additional syllabus materials. Everything we believe should be available for free in terms of a resource. And all of those model performance videos are also available as prep tools for free. So if you're interested to get started, just head over to our website, exams.pianovirtues.com. There you'll see the repertoire list, you'll see the model performance videos, the sample theory questions. It's also where you enroll. I would also encourage you to take a look at our exam welcome booklet, which is essentially our syllabus. It has the repertoire list. It's something you can print out or save and read all about the exams. And then all of the enrollment is done online. You will need to have a teacher associated with the student in order to do the enrollment. We just want to make sure that students have a teacher working with them and supporting them in order to take the exam. But the enrollment process is very user-friendly. Once you start it, it kind of guides you through. You will also need a parent to confirm the enrollment, just to give consent. But everything just walks you through. It's very easy to use. I'm going to turn it over to Landon now for the Q&A section.
Thank you, Theresa. Yeah, we've just got a few minutes here to wrap up, but we do have some really stellar questions in the Q&A. Here's a quick question maybe you can answer, Theresa, since you're there. For the exam, does the repertoire piece have to be memorized for the performance?
No, the repertoire pieces do not need to be memorized. You can use the book, or you can use without the book. Sometimes we feel that the book can give the student a little bit more confidence when they're playing. So memorization is not a requirement. However, we have also seen students that are a little bit more free without the book. So it just really depends on each child and their individual circumstance, whatever they're most comfortable with and can give the best performance with.
Excellent. Thank you. Randy, we've got a good question for you here. It's a broad one, but there might be a way to approach it succinctly. And it's one of our earlier questions. What strategies could be used to fix wrong techniques? Say you have, for example, a transfer student who comes in and, maybe they're at an intermediate level in terms of repertoire, but their technique is just not up to snuff. Any strategies that come to mind for you?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question because, technique, for many of us, it's all about remediation, right? When you have a transfer student coming in, you have to fix it, and we didn't get them right from the start. When you do have the student coming right on through, then you think of eliminate the problems. In other words, eliminate the bad habits so they never have a chance to come in. That's one strategy. But now when you have a student coming in and you have to fix them, what strategy do we have there? A curriculum that I like to jump the student back to. You always have to go a little earlier because they probably haven't learned much of anything of technique other than to whack the finger on the key, right? So going back to a level 3A, if they're an advancing student, put them to Technique and Artistry 3A, 3B, and 4 as a series. And then concurrently, put them in Scale and Chord Book of Piano Adventures Book 3, because there's a lot of elements of how do you address the thumb and the wrist circles and so on through the motions of arpeggios across the keyboard, and then also the hand and Faber. And that gives you a curriculum right there, 3A, 3B, and 4, Scale Book 3, and hand and Faber. And that's an actual full curriculum for remediation. And in fact, if you want to remediate your own technique, because you understand you hit some kind of a plateau, or you find that there's some tension in your playing you want to get rid of, that becomes a wonderful curriculum for your own professional development as well. One little highlight I want to mention is that sometimes, a technical impediment, can be frustrating, whether it's a student or in your own. But if you can isolate what you did wrong, right? Like we talked about the making O's. You find, I was just playing with my hand in an L here to the finger instead of being in alignment. Once you identify the key problem in that passage, it's like it does tend to dissolve the problem. It's amazing how fast the body will readjust to the right motions once you identify it, isolate it. So always be quite optimistic in those particulars. If you can get the right issue, fix it, and away you go. One of the things to be careful of is if you keep going back to pieces that you played a long time ago with technical problems, those technical problems jump back in. So I would not advise that for your strategy. Be better off learning some new pieces, newly applying the correct technique as you go.
Wonderful. We have another question related to, these students, we see them for a half hour or an hour a week, and then they go home, and many of them are playing on, keyboards without weighted keys, or they're playing on old, out of tune upright pianos, etc. And there's not necessarily somebody there at home to watch them play and to reinforce principles from the piano lesson. And so the question here from Lori is, what are some ways that you can keep their technique progressing positively, even without that at-home kind of positivity, as well as decent instrument to be playing on?
That's a super question, because how do you get the technique right if you're not monitoring it, right? And the student on their own, it becomes unmonitored. So the first thing I recommend is moving to 45-minute lessons instead of 30-minute, so that you have enough time to address it. The other thing that we found really workable is having some class lessons once a month, and maybe we alternate those. Sometimes we're focusing at a 6-week session or whatever. We just zero in on technique. We cover technique secrets. Then the student observes the technique of other students and sees us remediate their issues, and that can be very helpful. And then alternate that with maybe creative improv activities. So that can be helpful as well. And the other element is on our Technique and Artistry site, our Technique and Artistry Online, it has a student link. So it's you go to your teacher atlas, you go to that part of the site, and you can send one of the videos to your students. So as you have the student that having an issue that you really want to focus on, whether you're sending them a model performance video, you're sending a technique secret illustration, but that goes right to the student. So they can repeat that on their phone, watch it a number of times as a model, and then imitate. That can be quite effective.
Here we are, 134. I hope you've all enjoyed the presentation. Again, reach out if you've got any additional questions to follow up with. And Randy, I see you popping on there as well for the farewell.
Well, I'd say thank you, everybody, for joining us. It was a delight to talk with you today, and we do look forward to next time. Stay in touch.
Thanks,
Take care,
everybody.
everyone.